a lot of people misquote this quote because they only quote the first part and they don't read the last part. And the last part, I know, crazy, right? You want to know the rest of the quote?
I do.
The rest of the quote is, well, okay, so it starts with, a jack of all trades is a master of none. And the actual quote ends with, but oftentimes better than master of one. Wait, let's break it down.
Say that again.
This episode is for the creatives who can't choose one path and why being multi-passionate isn't a weakness. Creative pioneer, filmmaker, cinematographer, musician, art director, and the official videographer for the Endeavor series, joining us in front of the camera, this is Michael Jones Jr., also known as MJ.
Amen. Amen. Here we go.
All right, this is my first time holding the mic, the Afro mic, and I couldn't be more excited.
I love it. Welcome to the Endeavor series. I am your host, Greysa Lemons. The Endeavor series is meant to inspire and equip a generation to pursue their God-given purpose through a lifestyle of grit. So expect laughing, a lot of laughing in this episode, probably. Expect some tears, and expect to get a boost of inspiration after this episode. So welcome, MJ. This is so exciting because MJ and Grace, who is behind the camera, are both usually behind the camera, but today MJ is in front of the camera and he's sharing his story of endurance. So he's literally been here since day one of starting it, and yeah, we got to hear your story.
I'm excited. I was telling her it was my first podcast in front of the camera.
Woo!
So let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, MJ, who are you? Where are you from? What are you about? What are you doing right now in your life?
Okay, who am I? Let me get comfortable real quick. My name's MJ, as she said, but that's short for Michael Jones Jr. I'm named after my dad, and so he's Michael Jones Sr. I am originally from the South, so I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then I moved to Georgia and grew up there until I was about 9 years old, and then I moved to Michigan, so completely different from what I had experienced in the South. Huge culture shock. Then I moved back to Georgia and then back to Michigan, so I've moved a ton in my life. I grew up playing basketball my whole life, and I played basketball up until I was 22, youth league to college, and so you can imagine that it was a huge part of my life and everything I did. And now I live in California.
Woo.
Another culture shock moment for me, but I'm obsessed with it. I love California. This is home for me now, and I moved here because I joined a missions organization called Circuit Riders. And so I've been with them for the past 5 years, and I am now just pursuing full-time entrepreneurship, media, music, the creative arts on my own, starting my own thing, working with other people like Greysa, like Grace in the back. And yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
So you're from the Mideast, and then you moved over to California to join a missions group and have been here ever since, which has been about, how long have you been in California for?
I moved here in 2020, of August 2020, so it's almost been 5 full years.
Dang. And through that, MJ has been working in film, creative art direction, has been producing and creating campaigns for Circuit Riders, for other brands and other organizations, I guess you would call, right? Companies, things like that. And can you share, because we got to put this plug in here for you, a little bit about Wisely? What is Wisely?
Still in the birthing stage, but I was sitting with the Lord. I felt like he was inviting me to like dream with him for what was next. And I had started to kind of feel a nudge that there could be something outside of Circuit Riders. And so at that time, that was like what my comfort was, because I had been there for about 3.5 years at that point. And so it was like a weird process where it was like, okay, God's starting to like invite me to dream of other things that I've been carrying and things that I've wanted to do. I've always been very entrepreneurial. My dad is a CEO. He's a business owner. And a lot of my aunts and uncles also run their own things or just work really high up in the corporate space. And so I've just been around that world. I've always dreamt of being an entrepreneur, having my own thing one day. And so I felt like the Lord just like breathed on those dreams again and started to just give me vision as I was asking him, like, okay, Lord, if I transition out of circuit riders, whenever that time comes, what is the thing that you want me to build? And I felt like he just began to give me vision for a company and for a business that can operate in the arts and entertainment space, but bring culture of the kingdom. And so Wisely is simply that. It's a business that I'm currently launching, and there's a lot more to it that I think we'll probably get into throughout the episode, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So as a creative, what has been your biggest endeavor or challenge that you would say that you've gone through, whether it's, you know, something that is recently happening? I mean, I feel like everyone's still going through an endeavor. Like, the endeavor doesn't ever stop, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, what was like the biggest moment in your life that you faced as a creative?
I would say one of the biggest ones was probably when I decided to stop pursuing athletics. And it was kind of a journey of like accepting the fact that God had gifted me in more than just basketball. And like there was creative things that I've always had and wanted to act on, but just didn't have the luxury of time to pursue them. And I think the journey was like coming into agreement with who God said I was, outside of just like the one thing that I had done, or even the performance of athletics. And so it was like a big endeavor towards identity, and like also obedience and submitting to the voice of God over your life. I think sometimes that can be an endeavor in and of itself, because you are just like, life can teach you so many things and can train you to think a certain way about yourself, about reality. Like there's paradigms you can form, perceptions you can form. And I think it was a journey of the Lord, like almost re-representing himself to me, and then in thus that it was re-representing myself to me of like, there's all these things that I gave you that I actually have for you to like act on, and you don't have to hide like parts of who you are. And I think that's an endeavor, like that's been a journey for my personal life, and something that I wouldn't even say that I've like fully overcome, but I will definitely say over the past 5 years I've made substantial growth in, of just like accepting who God said I was. And for me, that has to do with creativity as an artist. And so
when did that transition happen? Because you were doing basketball pretty seriously. Like it wasn't something that was just a hobby. It was like you were pursuing basketball, and you had a moment in your life. Like what was that transition where you felt like God was like, hey, there's more that I have for you?
Yeah, I would say that's a great question. I would say for me it was, so to paint the picture a little bit, I played basketball at a 2-year school, and so I was playing at a junior college, and I was in the process of getting ready to transfer to a university, and I had like opportunities to try out for different Division I teams, and or have opportunities to play for different Division II teams. And so I was in the process of deciding like, what am I going to do? And so I had one school. It'd be really funny if the coaches are like watching this, because I doubt they remember who I am. But at the time, I was like in the conversation of like, okay, we want to give him an opportunity. I was in the process of deciding, okay, do I try out for this team and like walk on to this team, or do I like try for a lower division, or do I just stop? And in that summer, I was kind of like wrestling with it, and I also was like just recommitted my life to Jesus. And so there was a big like desire in my heart where I just wanted more of God. And I remember just asking the Lord, like, okay, I'm gonna decide about basketball, whatever, but honestly I just want something where I can like learn about you right now. And so that's how I found Circuit Riders, and I got to work with a media team that was like extremely skilled. Like some of the stuff they were doing, I'm like, you could see this on like a Nike commercial level, but they're like doing it for God, which was like such a crazy concept. Not that I didn't believe it was real, but I think as a creative, and you could probably relate, and a lot of creatives can relate, like when you see something like that, it gives you hope for like, okay, Christian art can be excellent.
Yes.
And can be good and powerful. And I think I came to a moment where I realized if I had continued to pursue basketball, I would have had to like shove all these other desires down for like however long. Because the higher you go up in sports, it's the more time consuming it is. And so moving from a junior college to Division I, it would have been like more time. And then my dream at the time was like going from D1 to playing overseas or playing professional somewhere. It literally just would have been my life, and I would have never been an artist in any way that I am now. And I just knew, I was like, I don't know if I could say yes to that.
Yeah.
Because I know there's other things that God wants me to do.
So you had a Troy Bolton moment.
I did. I always... Yo! Okay. This might be an unpopular opinion as a grown man, but I always related to Troy Bolton for that reason. I even wore the same number.
No way. I love that.
Not because of Troy.
Okay.
But it just was a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
So I always thought that was hilarious, and I would always make jokes about my Troy Bolton moment, my High School Musical moment, because I'm creative and I play basketball.
Because you're like, you're going into basketball as a more serious sport of what you're doing for your life, but you're like, but wait, I want to be a filmmaker.
Literally,
I want to be a creative.
I want to sing, God. I want to sing.
And God is like, yeah, I actually have more for you. Like, that's what I want to talk about. I think one thing that creatives do tend to face in their life is trying to pick one thing, you know. I have to do just this thing, or I have to do this thing. And I think that the Lord wants us to be open to what he has for us in every season, and that could be different. Because I mean, we can create our own plans, but like God really is the one that will establish the best plan for us, and it might not be what we expected. It might not be basketball. Sure. Like, those are the two extreme opposites, too, I think, when you're in high school. Like, it's either art or sports. Like,
which is why they wrote High School Musical.
Yeah,
That's literally the tension.
Yeah. I love that you talked about your story from college basketball to film. Now, can we talk about your journey as a creative struggling to pick one thing? Or, like, if there's anything deeper that you have to kind of share on that topic?
Yeah, I think I'm really passionate about this because... of a number of things, but we live in a generation that has so much access to each other at all times, just like we're so connected more than ever. And I think with that, there's sometimes a pressure that hits our generation on Gen Z because of this access. And then when you think about being a creative, literally being a creative became the thing because social media. Gen Z grew up with iPhones and smartphones and access to social media, where innately I think it kind of makes them become creative people, or at least explore their creativity more than previous generations. And so I think because because we're made in the image of God and he's a creator, I do think everyone does have at least some ability to create something. It might not be painting or being a filmmaker or being a graphic designer, but you do have the ability to create like something from nothing. You can create atmospheres or create cultures or create spaces where people feel safe. Like, you can use creativity in more than ways. But I think Gen Z grew up like creative in the arts because of social media. And so I think that caused like sometimes a pressure for us to figure out like what is our thing or what is our niche, especially when you go on social media and you can't scroll for like more than a minute before someone's like, here's 3 ways on how to become a successful entrepreneur, and here's 3 ways on how to become a filmmaker in the industry and break into the industry. And like, everyone has strategies for you, and everyone has opinions for you, and like it kind of creates this like almost like decision fatigue, or like a crutch for you to, or a pressure for you to feel like you have to just choose something. But I think as a creative, I've just had to accept the fact that the reality is God can gift you in multiple facets. Or like not, it's totally fine to like have one thing and be like, I'm really good at photos and I know it. I'm not good at making movies and I'm not good at graphic design, but I know I'm good at photos, and it's totally fine for you to run with that. But then you could be a creative where it's like, well, I love making photos and I love filmmaking, and I actually also paint and draw.
And I
just
also
don't like
love architecture.
Yeah, and I love architecture and cooking and like different things. And I think it's totally okay for you to love all of those things and to be fully yourself in those things. And there shouldn't be a pressure for you to feel like you have to niche down. Because I think, in all honesty, the pressure is like you have to niche down so you can have some form of success or influence. But like the minute you take your eyes off of the goal being the influence or the platform, and you realize the goal is actually for me to steward everything God gave me and to honor Him, then you start to realize like, oh, like there's no pressure for me to have to be this version of myself that the world is literally saying like, oh, you have to be, like you're a filmmaker, you can't make music. And it's like, nah, like God gifted me with music because I grew up in a musical family, and I grew up around movies, and I'm obsessed with filmmaking. And so you can do both, and you can steward them unto God, because one day I'll look at God and I'll have to answer for the talents. I'll have to answer for how I stewarded the things He trusted me with. I won't have to answer to Joe Schmo on the internet, like
1378.
Yeah, like it's always some random username, that has an opinion, or even like an influential person on the internet that thinks the only way to make it or be a form of success is to like niche down. No, I do think there is strategy in that, and I do think there's a valid point to it. I just think when it comes from a place of like applying unwarranted pressure or causing you to compare and walk in like comparison and pressure that's not from God, then it becomes toxic.
Or even like putting you in a box. Like, you know, God created so many things in the first 7 days. Like He created the earth, but He also created the animals and people, and there's so many different things in that. And I guess in the same way, He's like, I have so many things I want to do through you. You don't have to put yourself in this sort of box that doesn't allow you to be the fullness of what God gave you.
Right.
Yeah. But you're definitely also right, because there are some people that do work better where they do, like God is like, you just need to focus on this one thing right now. So there's definitely truth in that. But yeah, like you said, whenever it gets to a toxic point of stripping down the fullness of your identity, then there's issues.
Right.
Yeah. Do you have any like practical things that you could give to someone who is facing that struggle or fear of like, I need to pick something? And I mean, we were talking about college earlier, so this is like a little segue, but also connecting to it. I feel like a lot of people also feel this way when they pick their major. They're like, what major I'm going to pick? I have to pick one thing that's going to identify who I am for the rest of my life. Like, how terrifying is that? And so how does someone go about that?
There was a time where I had really wanted to focus more on my music and more on my media, but I was finishing out like my last season of college basketball, and I was faced kind of just with like a challenge of like trusting that God will have those things for me in time, but I have to steward where I am right now. And so I was still in my last season of sports. I was like for me, my perspective was this: I was the only Christian on my team, and I was the captain of the team, and I was finishing my last season of, at the time I didn't know this, but my last season of basketball. And I had all these other dreams, had all these other desires, but I kind of had to just like come face to face with the fact that like God wants me to steward where I am right now. And so I finished that season well, and then there was time for me to be like, okay, what's next? And I think it's okay for certain seasons to be about certain things. It's totally okay to be like gifted in multiple ways and to have multiple desire or multiple skill sets you want to pursue. But also, I think it just boils down to like, what is the Lord saying for you right now? But I look back on all those times and I'm like, thank God I surrendered and submitted to each season for what it was supposed to be. Because now I'm equipped to manage these types of things in the way that like we talked about before this, like
Right.
be a multifaceted leader. Because I paid attention to those seasons. So I think
Yeah.
it really does just boil down to obedience of what God's saying
Right.
in each season. And some seasons it might look like this, other seasons might look like that. In some ways I kind of feel like I'm in a season where, just to wrap it up, he's actually asking me to focus more on one skill set than the rest, which is music.
Yeah.
And in other seasons it's been more media. And so I'm kind of just like, it's just a journey. You just ask the Lord, you walk in partnership with him, and he knows best. And so,
Yeah. I like that you said that about the seasons, because when you're multifaceted, I mean, God could be asking you to focus on this thing right now, and that's actually going to equip you for where he wants you to go later, even though you have no idea that they have some sort of correlation to each other. Like, I always like to use the example of the janitor to a speaker or a pastor or leader, you know, because I think we all socially view janitor as like the lowest servant type of position to be in. And I hear so many stories of people that were like, that are very influential now, that they were like, oh, but God had me start cleaning toilets. God had me start in the streets. God had me start homeless. And it was because of those seasons of life that they were able to go into the next life that actually taught them what it is to lean on God, or what it is to be a servant, and so on and so forth. And we can take that principle as a creative, like, for example, like, I mean, bringing myself into this as a creative too, like, I went to college for education, for teaching. Like, I thought that had no correlation to production, you know, but teaching is actually a tool to figure out how to communicate something to your audience. How do you create a message for people?
Right.
So it's like God has like put me in that position so that now I'm here to do something like the Endeavor series, where I have to put something together. How do I create a message for people to be encouraged, inspired, to learn? So it's like everything is tied and connected to each other.
Right.
We might not see it in the moment, but I think God, like you said, does give us permission to be multifaceted, and they pour into each other if we allow him to direct us in it.
Right.
So
I agree. That's good.
There's a quote that a lot of people usually use for having to niche down, which is a jack of all trades is a master of none. And I did research on this quote because I hear it all the time, like, jack of all trades is a master of none. You need to pick one thing because you need to be like mastered in that area and that skill or whatever. And when I looked it up, it literally said a lot of people misquote this quote because they only quote the first part and they don't read the last part. And the last part, I know, crazy, right? You want to know the rest of the quote?
I do.
The rest of the quote is, well, okay, so it starts with, a jack of all trades is a master of none. And the actual quote ends with, but oftentimes better than master of one. Wait, let's break it down.
Say that again.
A jack of all trades
Yeah.
is a master of none. Basically, if you pour all your heart in so many different baskets,
Right.
you're only going to put 20% in each of them instead of 100% in one. So you're like, yeah, I already know.
No,
So,
I'm tracking.
I'm kidding.
It's good.
But it says, but oftentimes, I can't, we have to do this again. The last part of the quote is, but oftentimes better than one. So that means it's oftentimes better for you to have knowledge in multiple different areas than to just only know one thing.
Yeah.
So I think when I hear that quote, I immediately think of, say, the world is ending and you need to find strategy to try to get yourself out of a difficult situation. If you're only good at craftsmanship, you're not going to be good at medical things when someone is like in need. So that I feel like that's the picture. I feel like that's the picture that comes into my head, is like usually the saviors, quote unquote, in that movie, the big hero guy is the guy that like happens to know everything on the spot. And he's like, I know how to do this. Like, we're going to get through this together. So anyways, I thought that quote was interesting because I was like, dang, nobody knows the last part of that quote.
Dang.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Wow, that's insightful. To know that there's more to the quote, there's more to the story.
There's more to the story
and
that meets the eye.
what that says to me, first, this is one thought that I had while you were saying it, is I find it, I'm only going to speak from personal interactions with people who have quoted this quote that I've had, not necessarily making an assumption about everyone's intention when they quote this.
Yeah.
But most of the time when I've encountered people who quote this and misquote that, now that I realize there's more, like, misquote it, it's usually the people that aren't skilled in more than one thing, unfortunately.
Which is okay.
But it makes me wonder, it kind of takes me back to the comparison thing. It makes me wonder, like, why is that a belief? Or even, like, something that people, like, want to quote. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then in response to that, something else that I find extremely interesting, like something that I really study the Renaissance era as an artist. One thing that always moved me about Renaissance era, and even technically artists that came after the era of what is considered the Renaissance era, or on the late end, was so many of them were so multifaceted, so much so that it became coined as a phrase to refer to them as Renaissance men. And what that means is, or Renaissance people, what that means is, like, that's in that one phrase, not only are you recognizing that they had, like, an elevated skill set in a particular area, but often you're recognizing that that also includes the multifaceted people. Like, if you think about Da Vinci and Michelangelo, like, all of them were extremely talented painters, but they also had understandings of architecture, and they had understandings of, like, sculpting. I think you kind of have to have understandings of architecture to be able to paint things like the Sistine Chapel. There's another phrase that was coined from that understanding. It's called polymath, which is, it just means, like, the multifaceted person. And so a lot of the people, the reason why the Renaissance era was the Renaissance era was because it wasn't only reform in the arts, but it was reform in culture. It was reform in, like, political, societal thinking. And a lot of the people that were pushing the charge were also, like, creative people. And, you know, they were pushing the narrative of, like, societal thinking, but they were also artists, and they were painting things and trying to make sense of humanity through their art. And that gets the word polymath. And so those were the people that were the multifaceted, whether there's artists and architecture and sculpting, or it's, like, political power, but also creative, but also a leader in this way. That's what that era was marked by. And so I'm just like, those people have always existed, and it's not like it's a new thought that someone can have multiple skills. Like, it even goes all the way back to one of my personal favorite verses in the Bible and stories in the Bible is Exodus 31, where the Lord is literally giving direction to Moses on how to lead the people of Israel. And in that part of the scriptures, he's also giving him direction on, like, building and establishing the place that the presence of the Lord would dwell, which was the temple and the tabernacle, which hosted the Ark of the Covenant, which hosted the presence of God. And so he's literally telling Moses, like, you're going to build a place, or you're going to, like, you and the people are going to build a place where I can dwell with my people. And after that, he's like, I've literally anointed and given these artisans the spirit of wisdom to work in all craftsmanship, in multiple craftsmanship. And they're basically saying, like, they're on your team now. If we were talking, like, business startup mode, like, they're on your team, and they're about to lead out the architectural and artistry division of the strategy, and they're gonna help you build the temple where I'm gonna dwell. And literally in the Bible, for the next few verses and chapters, it literally gives, like, how the Lord gave Moses specific instructions and gave the artist specific instructions on how to build it. And so that right there tells me, like, the Spirit of the Lord can anoint and gift people in more than one way for His glory and for His kingdom. And it also reminds me of the parable of the talents. And basically, I mean, the whole premise of that parable and what Jesus was trying to say was, like, it sums up in Gen Z terms, what you do with what I've given you isn't between the guy that God gave 2 talents and then the guy that God gave 5. It's between the servant and the master. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, that's like it eliminates all conversation for any form of comparison, because like the Lord has trusted me with this and this, and the whole point is like, am I gonna bow to fear and not steward them, or am I going to take them and multiply them for him? Yeah. And so right there it already alludes to you that like some people, like, he could trust with multiple things. I think you could make the argument, like, does that mean that he's talking about these things that are like modern day talents? But at the end of the day, I think it's the real like message of it boils more down to like stewardship versus like, you know, the nuances of it, and it boils down to obedience. And fear is an enemy of both of those things. Yeah,
I like that. I think that's a really good representation of balancing the many gifts that the Lord's given you that's totally different from the other people in your environment. I feel like that goes, I mean, we're talking about creatives specifically, because I know like there are a lot of creatives that are in like this audience, the Endeavor Series audience, but also if you're not a creative, there's also so many other areas that are similar that you could be juggling, like school, work, family, like there's so many different things. And God wants to know, like, are you able to steward what I've given you? Right. Yeah. That's really good.
Even like spiritual gifts, like things that that aren't natural gifts. Same thing. Yeah. Am I going to use them for the Lord, or am I going to, like, for some reason make up an excuse not to operate in what he's given?
Yeah. I also want to add in a character from the Bible, David. Like, I think I wrote down here, David was a shepherd, a musician, a warrior, and a king. Talk about, like, 2 opposite things, a musician and a warrior. Right. Those are 2 complete, and then a warrior and a shepherd. Right. Like, and then a king. Like, those are like so opposite spectrums of things, and God trusted him with all of those things, but in specific seasons of his life. Right. Like, he wasn't a shepherd and a king and a musician like all at the same time. I mean, he was a shepherd and a musician kind of like around the same time, but it wasn't until later that being a shepherd and being a musician helped him later, through his obedience in the process, helped him later become a warrior and a king. Right. So I think that's so cool, because as we live our lives today, we're always wondering, you know, how do we navigate this thing? Well, let's look back at how they did it and how God is still asking us to do it today through those stories. So we talked about being a creative, the misconception that you have to niche down, or a jack of all trades is a master of one. I also want to talk about something that I know that you have expressed to me that you're really passionate about is being genuine in every area of your life. You want to talk a little bit about that and how you can navigate being genuine and being a creative?
If you lose that place of authenticity, like where it began, I think that's when you start to lose authority, because it starts to open up doors for forms of compromise. And I'm not totally just talking about like open sin or like crazy sin patterns or anything, but also just like forms of compromise in like, okay, I'm not being fully who God says I am today. The prize is Jesus. It's not the platform. It's not the influence or like even the gift. It's not that. It's the Lord. And I think the minute you kind of lose focus of that is when you start to kind of like leave from being that genuine version of what it was supposed to be.
You have to have a why. If you don't have a why, you don't have a brand. And if you don't have an understanding of your authentic communication through your why, then you're not really unique. You're just trying to be like everybody else in the music industry. So in the same way, taking those principles here, it's like, if my why isn't to glorify God, then I'm just a wishy-washy, pushover, random person who's creating not out of purpose, but creating out of just catching
Anything
on
else,
to
yeah, like,
anything. Yeah.
The trends, like whatever it is.
And
anything
without
else.
that depth, people don't connect.
Yeah.
Even in the secular world, like, you can tell when someone has such a passion in their why, and people are drawn to that, and their tool is through music that they share their, like, deep hurts, or it's through music that they share their exciting moments of life. So in the same way, like, if I want to be, I think, and I'm going to add this in here too, because we've talked a lot about this, but one of the hardest things about being a creative is we feel like our only option is going through Hollywood. And in order to go through Hollywood, you have to, quote unquote, make compromises in who you are so that you can make it, which is so sad and such a lie, because I've seen it happen so many times where people who are, like, they're strong Christians, but in their creative process in their work, like, their lives are slowly turning and being compromised because they're trying to fit into what they think you have to do as a creative to make it. When in reality, like, if God is for you and what you do, and you're authentic and genuine in what you do, it doesn't matter. He's gonna give you favor anyways.
Right. That's the only way you'll have authority. And like I said, the Great Commission is the Great Commission for everybody, every Christian. And God's mission, like, if God was a CEO of a company and he had a mission statement, and part of his strategy was sending Jesus dying, like, that was part of his whole strategy. At the end of that, like, purpose, it was to win back humanity. Right. And when Jesus died on the cross and the veil was torn, now I can have a relationship with the Father again because of what Jesus did. And in that means that it's not only for me, but it's for everyone on this earth, which means that's part of the Great Commission. Right. Like, that's why I'm wake up every day and do, or that's what I'm called to do as a believer, to wake up. And my thing that I do wholeheartedly before the Lord ultimately is unto people knowing Jesus. Not compromising in righteousness. And that has to be kind of like, that has to be like the compass. That has to be the insides of the machine when I make a film. You don't have to make it happen in your own strength. The minute you try to is when you compromise. And so the tension is in the church, so many people not in the church are like, I don't want to be a Christian because Christians are fake. And so the essence of what I'm saying is, when you work hard to not be fake, it's actually what gives you authority in your industry or whatever it is, to actually, like, live that message and speak it and make an impact in the rooms that you're in. That actually, in that's what actually helps people see Jesus for who he really is, and not just like religion. When you allow any form of compromise in, where now your message is like, and your witness is like tainted, because you're saying one thing but your actions are saying a different. And that's actually what deters people from the church. That's what deters people from Jesus, not Jesus, like, not the message of Christianity. Like, when people actually see Jesus for who he is, they want him, like, in the fullness. They're like, why would I not want that? But I think it's what deters people from that is sometimes the way that we imperfectly, obviously speaking about myself too, imperfectly represent him. And when we strive to be authentic in who we are, that's what actually deters the culture of like, oh, Christian religion is fake. It actually invites people into the fullness of God. It just definitely all goes back to, God is like, I'm not saying you have to narrow down. In fact, I want to work through you in everything that I have given you, but you need to steward it in the way that I am asking you to, that honors and glorifies him, because once we don't, then things get messy. I think that Hollywood is our only option, but it's so encouraging to see like different productions like Angel Studios and a couple of others that are starting to get into that, you know, starting to be able to use their creative giftings for the Lord and not compromise. Right. But it's hard because it's Christian content is usually known for being cringy. God will use it, but I think it's an invitation into the conversation of like, what does it actually look like to develop your skills? And the conversation of, just because I put Jesus on something doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. Like the content, yes, but the product doesn't always that doesn't always mean that it's a good thing just because I said it's Jesus. Like I can, if I don't take the time to learn lighting and film techniques and camera movement and editing softwares and sound design, I won't make a good film. I'll probably make a pretty mediocre piece of art. And I could make it and say and put Jesus in it and like talk about God, and God will use that part of it because he's good and he loves his kid. It reminds me of the scripture where it says like your skills will put you before kings. And basically what that's saying is like, dude, work on your craft. Yeah. Because that's the thing that will put you before people for you to be a witness.
Because now we're navigating the balance between, okay, you're extremely gifted in your skill. Now, like, we need to work on the genuineness in your why and where it's coming from. Or the opposite, where it's like, okay, you have your genuine and you have your why, but now God is like, okay, like, now let's work on your film school classes. Like, go take classes now and work on your craft. Yeah. Because we want to give them our best. Let's go into some questions that we have from our viewers, and we want to just, how do we practically answer these questions in a way where someone can take away this information and literally apply it like the next day? Like, okay, this is how I can practically go about this. Yeah. So one of our questions, or question number one, is, I think we've kind of answered some of these, but can I turn multiple passions into income, or do I need to niche down to be successful?
I love this question. I'm not answering this as an expert. I'm actually answering this as someone who's trying to figure this out himself. But I do think and see that there could be a strategy to phases. And so to answer the question at the root of it, I don't think you have to niche down, like in like a concept of like, I have to do this one thing for the rest of my life. But there could be a strategy in like, for this next year, I'm just going to learn filmmaking. Yeah. And then the next year, I really want to learn film composing. So then by year 3, I'm shooting or directing my own film and then composing the music for it. When you kind of think about it that way, it does make you a better, like, I am a musician and a filmmaker. I'm a better filmmaker because I know music theory. Because a big part of movies or videos or content or whatever you want to call is the music that tells an emotional story. Yeah. And I actually can like think through the way I want to shoot my shots differently because I understand the music I want. And so I think there's totally a way to be multifaceted and turn it into income. I just think it takes a lot of strategy, a lot of planning, and a lot of intentionality. Yeah.
Question number 2. Question number 2 is, does God want me to be excellent in one thing or versatile in many? Can I have more than one purpose in life, or does God want me to focus on one thing only? We kind of answered that a little bit.
I love it. I love the way it was phrased, though, because it prompted a different answer for me. I think you have to ask yourself 2 questions. And these are things that I continually do and have done. One, it is case by case, meaning it's kind of between you and the Lord of like, here's the things I want you to steward while you're on earth. Yeah. Maybe some of them you don't even fully see until you're 60. Maybe some of them you walk in now. But in your full journey, one day you'll sit before the Lord and he's going to be like, well done, because you stewarded them all. And so it has to be like, okay, Lord, what are you saying over my life? And what am I to put my hands to? And I'll also add this just because it's a nuance area. But I think sometimes if you look at things you're skilled in, and even if the Lord was like, yo, you're good at, I've gifted you to see things this way, which makes you a good filmmaker, makes you a good music artist, I think that's your answer. I think sometimes we wait for the big sign of like the Lord showing up and he's like, this is what you do for the rest of your life. But no, he's like, you already know, like, I've given you the skill set. Now I'm inviting you to steward it with me and walk in partnership. And so I think that's to answer the first section of that question. And then the second section, I think you kind of have to ask yourself, what does it mean to walk in my purpose? I think if I'm just being frank, being honest, I think I've had this tension before and I see it a lot, is sometimes I equate my purpose to like what I can do. And I don't, me personally, I don't think that that is what the Lord means at the end of the day. Because I think there are purposes that do connect to what you can do. But I know my sole purpose on earth has nothing to do with filmmaking. My sole purpose on earth has to do with sonship and relationship with the Lord. And then here's some skills that he's given me, and in that place it pours out into my purpose.
Yeah, even if you can't be a musician, an actor, a craftsman all at the exact same time, you can still develop your skills during that one thing that you're focusing on.
So true. Very true.
So now it's time for reverse interview, where you get the opportunity to ask me one question about the topic.
Ooh, okay. All right. I mean, I think mine's simple, but I feel like you'd have something good to say about it. Okay, as you're someone who's also multifaceted, right? We got this topic because I think it's one of the first conversations we had when we met was like, I don't know what got us on the topic, but we were talking about juggling multiple things. What is like one area or one tension point that you've had in your journey as a multifaceted, creative, business woman, entrepreneur, all the things on your resume? What is like one tension point that you've had?
Yeah, wait, that's a good question. I like it because the first thing that popped up in my mind was having to figure out what the priority is in the moment. And I think we kind of talked about that a little bit. When you have so many different things you want to do, how do I choose where to start, or how do I juggle all of it? Is my answer, at least what the Lord gave me, was what's the priority right now? And how much capacity do you have to focus on one thing but don't give up on the other things that you're doing? I mean, I started Endeavor, the brand, clothing brand part of it, during college, and that I was like full-time, 26 units, like that's a lot. But because it was my hobby, my passion outside of school, I was able to do both, where I was able to focus on school and focus on art, in branding and marketing. But yeah, I think the tension could also be, what do I really want to do right now versus what is my biggest priority right now?
That makes sense.
Because during school, what did I really want to do? The Endeavor series and acting and dancing and everything else. I guess I never like explained like as a creative the areas for myself what that is. But I would say for me, I love acting. I was a dance coach for like 3-4 years, which was so much fun.
Right.
I'm obviously like producer, speaker in that area. I used to do some fun painting things here and there, or the art of like creating events and atmospheres. Yeah. I did singing a lot, music, things like that. But then once I started college, there literally was a point where I actually had my professors tell me, like, you need to stop doing all of those creative things right now because you have to focus on school. And so I had to stop, but that didn't mean I wasn't thinking about it. I mean, we started the process of the Endeavor series right after I graduated college, because while I was taking my test and studying on my off time of my creative endeavors, LOL, I was planning for the Endeavor series. So I think, the tension was, I really, really want to do these things, but do I have capacity for it? Do I have grace for it? What is the priority that God wants me to do right now? But he's not asking me to give up those things. Right.
That's good.
Because if you want to be an actor, I can't just go walk into something and there I am, I'm an actor. Like, there's a process to it. So if you can start on those little processes so that when you go on to your next season, you're ready. Yep. Then you can go so much faster.
That's true.
In a way that's...
You're prepared.
Yeah, you're prepared. So...
It's a good answer.
If this story resonated with you as a creative, 3 takeaways that we want to leave with you. Being multifaceted is not a bad thing. There doesn't need to be a pressure to pick one thing. Number 2 is, in everything you do, make sure that your why is that you're doing it for the Lord and God's glory over your own glory.
Your own glory.
Glory
there
of God,
it is.
not the glory of you.
Not for your own glory.
And then number 3 is that some skills are seasonal.
It's true.
So I'm not a dance coach anymore. I mean, if I get called back into that, that'd be amazing. That'd be so fun. But that was for a season. And now I'm in podcasting. And so new seasons. But yeah, and then some verses that I want to also implement in this too that are also takeaways. The parables of the talents that you were talking about, Matthew 25, is Jesus actually celebrates stewardship and multiplication of gifts. He does not bury them.
Right.
Another one is Proverbs 16, commit to the Lord whatever you do and he will establish your plans. That's part of the being genuine in what you do. And then last but not least is Colossians 3, is whatever you do, do it, for the Lord, as for the Lord and not for men. You are serving the Lord Christ. So that kind of wraps up all three of those areas from what God has to say about it.
That's good stuff right there. If you're related to this, you're not alone, as you now know. And there is a strategy and clarity that the Lord has for you in the midst of you going through your own process like we've gone through and are still going through. So be encouraged.
And now it's time for you to get up and do something, because your day is just beginning.
What she said.
And that's a wrap.
And that's a wrap.
Woo!
That's good stuff right there.
Good stuff right there.